Hi Year 10s, we're going to look at some SOH CAH TOA examples for the trig stuff we've been looking at. So let's draw some triangles. Alright, so remember SOH CAH TOA only works for right angled triangles. Alright, so let's try and find an unknown angle. Alright, these can be centimeters. Alright, so what we need to do is figure out whether we're going to use SOH, CAH or TOA. Now what sides do we know? We have an angle. We don't have the opposite, so we can't use that. We do have the adjacent side, and we have the hypotenuse. So we're going to use CAH because we have the adjacent and the hypotenuse, which means cos. So cos theta, remember theta is just a Greek letter we use to say whatever angle it is. And then we need the adjacent on the top, which is 15, and the hypotenuse on the bottom. So remember, we need to get rid of this cos now. Now, the opposite of a trigonometric ratio is the inverse of it. So we're going to do that little inverse of it, 15 over 20. And if you type that into your calculator, you will end up with 41.41 degrees. So remember, all you have to do is the inverse of whatever it is. The trickiest bit is actually picking the right ratio, because if you put in sine or something here, it just wouldn't work. All right, let's have a go at figuring out an unknown side this time. Let's use this as our unknown side. We'll call this one 28 centimeters, and we can have a 56 degrees in here. All right, so what are we going to use? Well, what information do we have? We have the hypotenuse, because that's always the longest side, and it's always opposite the right angle. And we also have the opposite side, because it's opposite the angle. So we're going to use sine. So sine 56 degrees equals the opposite, which is 28, over the hypotenuse, which is x. Now what we want to do is move this equation around until we get x on its own. So currently this is 28 divided by x, isn't it? So we're going to do the opposite of what that is to get rid of it. Remember, you always move the bottom of the fraction first. So we need to move this. So we're going to do the opposite of dividing, which is timesing. So we put it over the other side like this. Now we need to get x on its own. So once again, this is timesing, isn't it? So let's do the opposite of that and divide. And then you can type that straight into your calculator, and if you do, you will come up with 37.77 centimeters. And that would be how long this hypotenuse would be. Now remember, because the hypotenuse is always the longer side, that's a good way to check your answers. If this number here was actually less than 28, well, you know you've done something wrong, because it should always be the biggest number. Okay, let's have another go at finding an unknown side. All right, what do we want to do? Let's call this 42 degrees in here. This can be our unknown side, and this can be 40 centimeters. So what are we going to use? SOH, CAH or TOA? Find out what information we have. Well, we have the opposite side here, and we have the adjacent side here. So we're going to use TOA, because we have, the opposite and the adjacent. So tan 42 degrees equals the opposite, which is x, over the adjacent, which is 40. Now, always move the bottom of the fraction, so we're going to pull the 40 straight over to the other side. And this is easier than the last one because we don't have to do an extra step. You can type that straight into your calculator, and you will end up with 36.02. Oops, let's put a point in there. And centimeters, of course. So, hopefully that's a bit of an example about how to use it. Make sure you figure out what information you're being given. So remember, the hypotenuse is always the longest side. Now, if I just gave you this, you could not tell which is the opposite side because there's no angle to tell from. So if I put the angle down here, this becomes the opposite because it's opposite the angle, and this becomes the adjacent. If I drew the exact same triangle, but put the angle up here, this is still the hypotenuse, but this one becomes the opposite, and this one becomes the adjacent. Depends where the angle is. So good luck with this.